So have a listen to this. A Brexiteer called up the LBC radio show to explain how they still like Brexit, even though they acknowledged that it was causing damage to them, but they weren't sure if it was actually causing any damage to the economy.
Brexit, and actually has affected me quite badly, but I still would vote it again because I still believe in the principle of it.
Even though you're suffering as a result of it?
100%.
Well, that was definitely not on the side of the bus, but he seems happy with it.
Isn't that just an obvious case of cutting off your nose to spite your face?
Well, I think it's going to take... This problem is we were in the EU for 50 years. We ain't going to fix it in 6 months. It's going to take time.
It's not. It's been years now. It's been several years.
It's coming up to almost a decade since the vote, and it's about 4 years, coming up to 5, since we voted to leave.
Since we left.
Not really, wait, several years. But I'll give you another example. I went to business to Amsterdam the other day. We were separated into two queues, Europe and the rest of the world. And obviously I joined the Europe queue on the basis I'm in Europe, we're a European. I'm like, no, you're not a European, you're the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It's like they don't get it. It actually says EU, it'll say European Union, it'll have the flag on it. And yet he still was like, no, I'm European, so I get to go through. This British exceptionalism.
I mean, there are obvious downsides to leaving. Are there any upsides yet?
Well, yes, there are. People keep forgetting it.
What?
It's the 15 billion.
Ah, yes, the 350 million on the bus, which in fact turned out to be a lot less than that, because once you include the rebate and the fact that the EU gives us money back, the figure is far, far lower, to somewhere in the region of about 161 million. So it's not even close to that figure of 15 billion, it's half of that. Now, one of the things that he would have said, and so would have Boris, is, well, we can spend that money where we choose. So, for example, Cornwall used to get 100 million a year, except listen to this.
Gets through the European Union programme, gets 100 million euros per year. But there's no guarantee that Cornwall would get that money if we left.
There is.
Cornwall, one of the poorest areas in the UK and in the EU, has never received that 100 million. In fact, it's about half of that, 50, and this year it looks likely that they're going to receive nothing. This is what happens when you allow idiots in charge of governments.
What 15 billion?
Well, the 15 billion annual fee that we were paying to the EU, we're now no longer paying. It's the equivalent of Keir Starmer's black hole. Imagine black hole times 2.
But the economic impact of leaving is even bigger, isn't it?
I don't know.
40 billion is the suggestion.
Has that been proved?
That's the suggestion. I think it was LSE that said that.
In fact, here's a list of people and organisations describing the damage of Brexit.
The Centre for Economic Reform claims the government has lost out on £40 billion in taxes because of the damage done to the country's output by leaving the European Union.
There were figures published just before Christmas, which you probably saw. Brexit has cost the government £40 billion a year in lost tax revenue. What, as a very leading businessman, what has the impact of Brexit been on business generally in the UK?
It's been catastrophic.
Now, businesses say they feel like they're banging their heads against a brick wall over improving trade with the European Union. That's according to the British Chambers of Commerce, which says its members are still struggling with the UK's post-Brexit trading arrangements.
How much stronger would the economy be if we'd stayed in the EU?
We think that in the long run, it reduces our overall output by around 4% compared to had we remained in the EU.
How would you describe 4%, though? Would that be the equivalent of another conflict or a smaller pandemic?
It's a shock to the UK economy of the order of magnitude of the sorts of other shocks that we've seen from the pandemic, from the energy crisis. Those have also had percentage point impacts on the level of output in 5-10 years' time.
What we've experienced over the last decade and more has been partly self-inflicted, without question. Brexit, without doubt, has made us poorer than we otherwise would have done.
Farming is collapsing in Britain right now because of Brexit.
But I'm joined by a particularly distinguished Professor of Economics at King's College London and former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes.
The big evidence, I'm afraid, of the last 6 or 7 years is that things like uncertainty and the cost of Brexit actually have a more damaging impact on investment than the headline rate of corporation tax, because what the OBR says is we've now got pretty clear evidence that Brexit has reduced investment, and that's one of the reasons why the growth forecast going forward is so dismal.
The UK economy as a whole has been permanently damaged by Brexit. It's reduced the economy's potential output significantly, eroded business investment. I mean, look, if we hadn't had Brexit, we probably wouldn't be talking about an austerity budget this week. The need for tax rises, spending cuts, wouldn't be there if Brexit hadn't reduced the economy's potential output so much.
What I do think is we haven't actually benefited from Brexit economically.
Well, but look, our economy is growing faster than Germany. How is that so?
So let's really tackle that, because it's something that Brexiteers talk about a lot. We can first of all talk about the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine, and from that invasion, that meant Europe had to cut off any supplies and trade with Russia, and for Germany, that included a huge amount of gas, 90% in fact, which is very damaging to the economy, and it's been difficult for Germany to recover from that alone. And while there are some positives, it's really, really important to take note that these are based on what the quarters are saying, not on the bigger picture. So essentially, when you zoom out of the economy, over the longer picture, the economy hasn't been doing that well. For the last 2 quarters of 2023, for example, we were in recession, and now all of a sudden we've started growth, and it seems to be spurred on by the service sector. If I was to make a comparison, it would be along the lines of a car, with the engine trying to get as much fuel as possible and just not finding it, and then having to stop and start. What this Brexiteer and other Brexiteers seem to misunderstand is that when you reduce these barriers and you have things uniform, such as roads, transportation, metrics and sizes, it means that the actual economies can work better together, and this means reduced costs, which means trade is better, which means economies can grow quicker. And what it also fails to take into account is other standards, so living standards, for example. Disposable income, that's your savings, that's extra cash you have in your pocket, went down by 0.7% in the UK. It hasn't affected Germany in the same way. But there are other metrics. Poland has had an economic boom, with the economy expecting to have a 3.5% growth in 2025. Ireland's economy has grown by about 5%. And Greece, which was battered a decade ago, is now one of the fastest growing economies in the EU. But you'll never hear a Brexiteer make mention of all of these successes. And I'm not even done yet. Child poverty, another indicator of how successful a nation is, has gone up since 2016 by over 500,000. There are now more food banks being used than there are McDonald's in the UK. Since 2016, the UK has seen shoplifting increase by 25%. Household savings are down by 10%. UK household debt has increased by over 2 trillion by 2024. The Bank of England reported that the average household debt to income ratio is now over 130%, whilst Germany 92%. And finally, there has been an increase of 15% in debt collection since 2020. But yeah, let's focus on Germany.
If you want to talk about the economics, we've got poorer. We left. We're going through the biggest fall in living standards since records began right now. People don't feel better off.
The same with the Germans. They're in the EU. We're the fastest growing. Why? It's not that bad. I've got a business trading with Europe. It's not that bad.
You just told me it's harming you.
It is harming me in some ways, but it's not so bad. There are other ways it's got better.
But it's not so bad wasn't on the side of a bus, was it? We were promised sunlit uplands. This was going to transform our nation into global Britain. And now it's become, it's not that bad.
Brexit, it's not that bad. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Please leave them, they do help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this, please hit the like and subscribe button. Once again, thank you to all of my Patreon and YouTube supporters. You keep this channel going and growing. And those who buy me a coffee, thank you so much. Every time we do, I do go and buy a coffee. Keeps me up at night making movies and videos like this. Once again, thanks for listening. Bye for now.